Wild Health is about optimizing you. We use genomics, blood work, biometrics, microbiome assessment, many other tests, and a conversation with you to come up with a full health optimization plan. What's the perfect diet, exercise, and supplement plan for you and only you? The Wild Health podcast is about optimizing all of us. Here we cover the cutting-edge science that gives you the base to be able to apply the personalized plan we give you as a patient. To sign up as a patient, go to wildhealth.com. Or if you're a physician or health coach and you want to learn how to do this for your patients, we're happy to help as well. Wildhealth.com for all the information on becoming a patient or working with us.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wild Health podcast. Mike Mallon here. I am excited to be talking about athletic performance and supplementation. It's one of my areas of personal interest, an area that I really enjoy talking about just generally and diving in deep. And to do that with me here today is Nate Berry. Nate is our Director of Athletic Performance here at Wild Health, and he's got a long background in athletic performance and training, and is the man I go to whenever I have a question about supplements for athletes. So Nate, welcome to the podcast, man.
Great to be here, Mike. Always enjoy our conversations around supplementation, anything athletic performance. So excited to bring it to our audience today and look forward to diving into the weeds.
Before we get into that, will you just honor us with a little background about Nate Berry? Where'd you come from? How'd you get into athletics? What's the story back there?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, at least in sports, is it's always been a big part of my life. Growing up, and always just identified with everything when it comes to being an athlete, the preparation, just being a part of a team. I've always just fallen in love with the athletic preparation process, and obviously was able to do that not only as a profession but take that passion of mine into my profession. I was a collegiate strength conditioning coach for 15 years. During that time, I was always trying to evolve my process, get the most out of every athlete possible, like literally squeeze everything that we can out of them, and pretty quickly realized that exercise, strength conditioning is not going to solve all of our problems. So was always interested in kind of the supporting cast and the total environment that the athlete needs to develop to operate at their best consistently over time. And so that was kind of, my goal in the athletic performance space was to really kind of evolve the functional medicine and really bridge the gap between the two. So that was kind of why I got connected with you guys at Wild Health and why I jumped on board. And that's obviously what we're doing here at Wild Health, is to master every detail, to again, get everything out that we can of these athletes. And what we found is that these athletes may be doing some really healthy things, but in an unhealthy environment, and you can't get better in the environment that you got sick in or got injured in or had, bad performance in. And so that we just find that there are things in their environment that just are working against them, or performance anchors, what we like to call them. And so it's been just an awesome experience to be a part of Wild Health and to be able to really dive into this side of the space and really kind of adapt this functional medicine to athletic performance.
And that's a good call out too. I mean, supplements are not the only tool that we have in our tool belt for working with athletes. Obviously, you're focused on, dialing in their diet, dialing in their sleep, dialing in their fitness routines, their recovery modalities. All those things are super important. But it does seem like supplements become a decent part of the picture as well, because while there's certainly plenty of athletes we have that are not necessarily living the cleanest life, a lot of them out there are doing really good. They're 95% of the way there in terms of the quality of sleep and nutrition and fitness and recovery that they're getting using all the modalities out there, but they need a little bit extra help, and that's where it seems like supplements can jump in and help us out a little bit. So tell us a little bit before we get going about what you do here for Wild Health. What's your position? Who are you working with? What sort of stuff do you do on a day-to-day?
Yeah, so again, title is Director of Athletic Performance or Optimization here at Wild Health, and that's just basically running the athletic performance arm Wild Health, and we're working with professional athletes. A lot of NFL, MLB is kind of the bulk, but CrossFit athletes, big wave surfers. It's just the whole gamut of really every athlete trying to perform at the highest level on the biggest stages. So we're kind of here to really uncover all of those 1% and have success in the margins. And so that's kind of the population that we work with on the athletic performance arm of Wild Health.
Awesome. So I know we're going to dive into supplements here. I want to talk about everything supplement related. I want to talk about your process. I want to talk about the type of things that you use supplements for, how you identify a supplement. One of the biggest questions or most common questions we get from our clients is, should I be taking this supplement? Because there's just so much marketing out there for all these different supplements, and everybody tells you that they're all gonna make you grow 2 inches and and put on 20 pounds or lose 20 pounds, or it's just like, it's crazy the marketing out there for all these things. And obviously it's a huge, multi-billion, maybe $1 trillion industry. I don't know. It's ridiculous. So I want to dive into all that. Tell us a little bit personally about when you first started using supplements, whether that was professionally or personally. What was the trigger for you to realize that there was an opportunity here?
Yeah, I think, I started using them when I was an athlete just because, I saw everybody else taking supplements, and I just didn't want to, get left behind in that space. So if everyone else was supplementing, I knew that I had to supplement as well to at least match their performance. There's a lot of people that are going, beyond that, obviously illegally, and using performance-enhancing drugs, which, obviously is something that we're trying to stay away of. But I think with an intelligent approach, with the utmost amount of intention, that you can get a lot of performance-enhancing qualities from good supplementation. And I think if you master sleep and some of these other foundational qualities, they're actually going to be a lot better than performance-enhancing drugs, and they're going to have a lot more longevity without less cost. So, obviously with the process that we have really honed in and developed, like, we just don't find that there's even a need for performance-enhancing drugs, just because we can move the needle that we have found just through natural modalities and supplementation. But yeah, it's always been a big part of sport. There are some people that, are fearful of getting into the space just because there's, like you said, there's so much information. It's a very unregulated space, so it's hard to know what the exact, quality of the product that you're getting. And so a lot of the athletes just don't know how to get into it, don't know what the right product is for them. And so they just never, step their foot into the water. And so that's, obviously our job is to make sure we have all of that knowledge, and that we're educating our athletes, and that we have the appropriate processes to really help them as an individual and get the most out of their performance.
Yeah, let's be clear here. Like, we're talking about performance enhancement. The only difference is the difference between drug and supplement is that, a regulatory body hasn't identified a supplement as a drug yet. So, we've got similar goals here, but we're obviously leaning towards the things that are not identified as PEDs. So, but ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve performance. We're trying to improve recovery. We're trying to improve performance. We're trying to get our athletes to the that extra couple percentage points. If they're performing at 95%, we want to get them to 98, right? Or we want to get them to 100. And that's where sometimes we lean on these tools. So when you think about supplementation in your athletes, Nate, what are your primary goals? Like, what are the areas that you're trying to focus on or trying to get a leg up on?
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost, we look at kind of our supplementation routine as really an extension of our diet. And once we've kind of mastered our diet, and we're preaching the utmost of high quality foods with the right quantity, the right timing, and the right individualization principles to support that athlete. Now, we know that just the quality of the food that we're getting is a lot lower than it used to be. We used to get a lot of nutrients from food and from water. And those two things, the quality of those things have degraded quite substantially. And the stress load of our athletes have increased quite substantially with social media, with the website, just having the World Wide Web, just all of the information that's out there that these athletes are just bombarded with, travel, emotional stress, psychological stress, like everything that is a part of being a professional athlete. We know that the stress load has increased dramatically. So, obviously, if you are not supplementing, you're probably at a disadvantage. So this is really kind of our thought process, is looking at supplements as an extension of our nutrition strategy. Because if you're not supplementing with that stress load, you're probably at a higher risk of injury and a risk of decreased performance. But with that, we really want to make sure that we have the right feedback systems in place, meaning that we are always testing. If we're not testing, we're guessing, right? And what gets measured gets managed. So we make sure that we regularly test through blood work. We often use Genova's NutriVal, which is a metabolomics test of organic acids and a combination of blood as well. And we're always testing, retesting, just to make sure that we are bringing the body in balance, that we're filling all of the physiological holes that we need to, and then also taking the subjective feedback from the athletes constantly. So when we're implementing a new strategy or a new supplement, we're in contact with that athlete pretty regularly, just to see the response, what they're feeling through the process, and then using things like body composition, heart rate variability, heart rate, and then blood work, sleep metrics, the NutriVal test, the metabolomics test, just to make sure we're covering all of our bases from that objective feedback measurements. And I think it's important to note that just because we use it in one phase of their off season or in season, or this is a strategy that we used last year, it doesn't mean it's going to work for them the next year. And that's why it's always good to have those feedback loops in place. And when we're implementing a new supplement, that we are testing it in off season to make sure that they're adapting favorably and responding the way that we want to before we bring it in season. So it's a very meticulous process, again, approached with the utmost amount of intention, and that we're getting constant feedback, and that we're always evaluating what we're doing to make sure that it's working for us, not only now, but in the future.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's two different reasons why someone could need supplementation. There's the lack of adequate amount of that particular mineral or chemical in the diet, right? And that comes from a few different things. One, food sucks now, right? So there's there's less B12 in vegetables, for example. There's, everything's genetically modified and, sprayed with chemicals and all this other crap. So it's just, food just doesn't have the nutrients that it used to have in it. And so does water too. You mentioned the minerals in water, and, we basically pull all of the minerals out of the water in our cleaning process now. So there's because of this, there's a lack of a lot of the micronutrients and the nutrients that we need in the diet, especially if you're talking about someone who's performing at a peak level, right? So people, and that gets to the other piece of it, is that, when you're performing at a peak level, when you're an athlete, you have higher requirements of these nutrients. So it's not like the ADA values for B12 or for, vitamin D or for pretty much any of these nutrients. Those are not adequate to support the metabolic and micronutrient needs of an athlete performing, at a professional level, or even not even a professional level, like really, amateur level athlete is often depleted of a lot of these micronutrients, let alone the regular population, because the diet sucks. So you've got, two competing interests here, where we're not getting enough of this food in our diet. And then two, we're using more of these micronutrients just for the metabolic processes that are happening at that high performance level. So that leaves us with a situation where, we're basically, forced to supplement with a lot of these micronutrients. And, there's the opportunity to lean on diet, dial in diet. And, as you mentioned, we're thinking of these as an extension of nutrition. So we always lean on nutrition first. But I would say a lot of the times, that's not enough. A lot of the times people are coming to us, they're already pretty clean. Their diet's pretty adequate. They're eating, they're eating, grass fed, organic meats. They're free range meats. They're eating organic vegetables and really putting the right stuff on their plates. But like we said, foods don't have as much, and they need more because of the level of performance. So we kind of run into this wall on a regular basis where we end up having to supplement just to get people the adequate amount of those micronutrients to perform at such a high level.
Yeah,
So
and I think I would add to that.
tell me,
Mike, I would probably add to that too. Like if we're talking about our athletes, just again, their diet from a quantity perspective. Like some of our offensive linemen, let's say, they're 300 pounds and they have a higher nutrient requirement. But if we're giving them 5,000 calories, like how much utility are we going to get beyond 5,000 calories supporting a 300-pound athlete that it actually is going to support them without at some point becoming a further stress or a toxin? Because eventually you're going to burden the gut. It's going to become such a stress and a chore to keep eating that amount of calories in that amount of time that it's just almost like impossible, and it becomes just an added stress and unnecessary stress that actually does more harm than good. And that's where we find, again, that supplementation appropriately can really be an extension of their diet that can add a lot more value than adding more calories. And that's where, again, our process and how we refine that and how we pulse things in, the right micronutrients at the right time can really support these athletes and their allostatic load.
Yeah, sometimes the answer isn't 5,000 calories worth of broccoli. It's just to take a sulforaphane pill. It's not the same thing. All right, so tell me a little bit about the main buckets that you think about for supplementation in athletes. What are the areas that you're going to focus on when you're thinking about supplementation?
Yeah, so really when it comes to athletes, we're looking at structural support, whether that's just from the amount of structural stress that they get from playing the sport or they're recovering from an injury. So we're supporting those structural tissues, which are muscle, connective tissue, and neural tissue. Or we're supporting the amount of energy that it needs to not only perform at a high level, but to recover at a high level. Those are all energy dependent resources. So we're really there to support their mitochondria and making sure that we're optimizing their mitochondria. And then the third would be probably inflammation. And you could probably put stress adaptation under energy, under inflammation as well. But obviously these guys are under a huge amount of stress. They have, constant inflammation. They are under oxidative stress constantly. And so they're kind of in this perpetual state of inflammation. So just their ability to clear inflammation, their ability to make sure they have a low inflammatory lifestyle, and that we are giving them all the support to help with that inflammation really allows them to recover quicker and more consistently over the course of a season. But those are kind of the three main buckets. Anything I missed there?
I mean, we've talked a lot about hydration in the past as well. So,
Yep.
Most people probably don't think of hydration as a supplement, but it can be, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Sorry, I missed that. Thank you for bringing that to light. Just because I do believe if you have your hydration strategy dialed in, it's one of the most beneficial strategies that you can get to really improve your cardiovascular output. Like the science is like a 20% increase in cardiovascular output if done appropriately, which again is more than any PED that you could take. So, just the propensity of the outcome that you can get just through hydration alone is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and you're not just talking about volume of water. You're talking about what you put in your water. You're talking about what supplements that you take along with your hydration, the timing of the hydration, the volume, all those things, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the electrolyte mineral support that it takes. You can't do appropriate hydration just with water alone for athletes. And so that comes down to a little bit more complexity just in terms of the solutions and the makeup of those solutions, the timing of those solutions, the quantity, the individualization. So, yeah, you're exactly right.
You mentioned in those buckets, you mentioned structural inflammation and energy. Can you just give us a couple of examples of some supplements that would fall under those different categories?
Yeah, so really what comes down to, you have your vitamins, vitamin A, all the B vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. I would probably put choline and creatine for an athlete just as important as that vitamin bucket, meaning they have a lot of vitamin-like processes in the body. Amino acids, minerals and trace minerals, sometimes herbs, botanicals, and spices can be beneficial for structural support. Different phytochemicals, so that's going to be your anthocyanins, polyphenols, quercetin, resveratrol, polyphenols, and then essential fatty acids are going to be a lot of the different supplements that we're going to use. For structural support, obviously, it's going to be a little bit different for like a connective tissue versus muscle tissue versus neural tissue. So the different types of those specific molecules are going to be different for where we're really trying to upregulate based off of the symptoms or the mechanism of injury.
How about inflammation or energy? Any differences there in the supplements you're reaching for?
Yeah, so again, all kind of reaching for those types. It's going to be what supports the mitochondria is going to be a little bit different than you're going to get from like inflammation. Now, I think there is some overlap between the three of those, but like for inflammation, I think we've had a lot of success with quercetin, resveratrol. I think CoQ10, alpha lipoic acid, I think vitamin C, glutathione, which we could probably have a whole podcast on in of itself. You actually put me on to the vitamin E tocotrienols, the Delta Gold that we've had a lot of really good experience with. I think PQQ is a very underrated molecule when it comes to inflammation. But those are just some types of and examples of specific molecules that we're using for inflammation, along with DHA, EPA is a big one. That's kind of just foundational for us. And then we use pro-resolving mediators as well for inflammation.
Yep. I think this is a good, after you just like rattled off 75 different supplements, this is a good time to mention that we're not putting everybody on that many supplements. It's like, that's where the art of this comes in. It's like figuring out like, the few things that are going to get the athlete to, that optimal level of performance without giving them a bag of, 20 pounds of pills to take every day. Right. Like, sure, you could just take all of those things, but like, there's the law of, reducing or decreasing, results after a certain amount of time. And obviously it's expensive. So we're not putting everybody on 75 supplements, but it does speak to the wealth of different supplements out there that could potentially get to a lot of these same advantages. So the tool belt is large. It's a matter of figuring out which ones are going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah, it's a great example. For instance, I think the literature gives us at least probability, but we don't know exactly how that specific athlete in their specific environment with their demands is going to respond to a supplement. So there is some trial and error, like the blood work, the genetics, it really does get us on the dartboard, but it takes some time and some work to allow us to hit bullseyes to really find what works well for them. And Mike, we've talked about this, like and there's a lot of great literature on curcumin, but I personally just haven't seen a ton of great responses just on curcumin alone as a supplement for inflammation. So just because the research points us in a direction doesn't mean it's going to be a potent strategy for our athletes.
Yep. Now, there's so much to this, right? Like there's the laboratory values, there's genetic predisposition, right? So like, there's genetic for example, there's genetic predisposition for, a reduction in glutathione. Like somebody just doesn't have the enzymes that replete glutathione as well. So we know that, then we test glutathione levels. Glutathione levels are low. So, all right, we're going to replace glutathione. And now you're stuck with, all right, how am I going to replace glutathione? Am I going to give them glutathione? Am I going to give them, slow release glutathione? Am I going to give them liposomal glutathione? Am I going to give them a precursor? Or am I going to give them N-acetylcysteine and hope that increases their glutathione? Or am I going to give them glycine, which hopefully increases their glutathione? So it's a combination, and that's why sometimes NutriEval metabolomics can be helpful, but also just talking with the patient and figuring out where the need is from, what their diet looks like, to better understand what could potentially be depleted here. Like maybe they don't eat a lot of meat, so somebody who, even though their B12 levels aren't in the red, they're still something that you want to supplement because they're just not getting an adequate amount in the diet. So there's a lot of variables here, which is where the art, and why, honestly, personally, at least for me, why it's super fun to do this and really dig into this stuff with athletes and figure out what's going to help them.
Yep, no doubt.
So talk to me about your process a little bit, Nate. Let's just start from the beginning. Like, how do you first identify that there's a need for a supplement in one of your athletes?
Yeah, so we always go through just a process of just outlining kind of their goals in the sport, like their strengths and limitations. Just uncovering kind of their goals within the game. Things that are holding them back from reaching their ultimate performance or getting to the top of the mountain. So not only, again, from the objective feedback that we're getting through those measurement mechanisms that we talked about, but also just figuring out, like, hey, is there any limitations that we need to upregulate? Like, specifically, maybe it's body composition. Maybe they're too heavy. Maybe they're too light. Maybe they need to gain some lean body mass that is really going to increase their performance. And so making sure that we're using the supplementation to approach and attack that goal, so we're getting their limitations to the point where they're not a limitation anymore, is going to really help their performance. Or they, let's say they've had a history of a specific type of injury or a history of a specific symptom that's holding them back. So where can we support them from those supplements to reach those goals? And then using, again, the biological testing, the biological feedback devices to really then say, okay, where are we missing? What holes that we need to fill? So those are kind of like the two arms that we're really going to attack our supplement program with.
And then once you've identified this need, so we can even give an example. So maybe there's a need for reducing inflammation. Like, we've identified this person that has high inflammatory levels. Maybe their high sensitivity CRP is elevated. Maybe their A to G ratio is off. They've got some genetics for CRP or TNF or something like that makes us pretty confident that they've got inflammatory problems. Maybe they've even got like some recent injury that's just nagging and they can't quite get rid of it. So we got an inflammatory issue. How do you then go about starting to identify the supplement that they need to help support that inflammatory issue? Like, how do you go from, I've got this inflammatory issue, to picking the supplement that you tell them to start taking?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would first off kind of step back and talk about supplements in of themselves and the quality of the sourcing that we're getting. And I probably spend an unruly amount of time really diving into supplement formulas, the sourcing of the supplementation, the company, just are they third party tested, just to make sure that it's the highest quality supplement possible. And we really try to reach for whole food supplements, meaning that they're kind of concentrated whole food molecules versus a synthetic molecule created in a lab. There are a few synthetic supplements that we do use that do provide value in specific times. But as a general rule, we really try to reach a whole food complex that's really got the cofactors and coenzymes involved, that's kind of wrapped in that evolutionary matrix. And the more you process it down, the more, issues that could come from applying that to our physiology. For an example, if you just took zinc alone, zinc may rise, but copper could decrease. So with zinc supplement, I always like to make sure that number one, they have high copper levels, or picking a zinc supplement that has copper and selenium. And so it's a zinc complex versus just a single source supplement. So that's a big part of our process on the back end, to really finding the right supplements when we do choose a supplement. From there, it's just making sure that we're doing all the testing to make sure, if they are, experience a symptom, or they have a limitation, or they have areas where their performance is not as good as they want to, are there any holes that we need to fill that are showing up in their blood work or their NutrEval that is really holding them back from attacking that goal, and we'll fill that hole first and foremost. And looking at their genetic propensities to being deficient in certain molecules as well. Sometimes it actually might be a microbiome absorption issue. So maybe that's something, if they're having some microbiome issues, that might be something that we need to attack first and foremost before we even supplement. So there's a little bit of complexity there as well, or some nuance. But once we've kind of found if there is any correlations between their blood work and towards towards their goals or limitations that they're trying to approach, obviously that's going to be first and foremost. After that, I think there are just certain things, like if we're trying to attack body composition, just making sure that we have the appropriate amount of essential amino acids on board, and that it's the right timing, that we're supporting their workout, so the demands of what they're doing within that phase of their off season or in season. And then obviously just the physiological needs that they need to have is kind of where we start in that approach.
So what are you practically looking for, like on the bottle itself, to identify like, hey, this is a reasonable supplement, because anybody can make any supplement and make any claim they want to about that supplement. They could like literally put dirt in a bottle and sell it to you for $80 a month and tell you that you're going to grow a 30 year. Like there's no regulation here. So like when I look at that, dirt capsule, how do I tell whether that's a legitimate dirt capsule or somebody's just trying to make a buck?
Yeah. So, there are a couple certifications out there that are pretty good. Like, obviously there's Certified for Sport, NSF. That is obviously a certification that making sure everything within that supplement is certified for sport. So that's a label that you can have some faith in terms of what they're putting in the product, and making sure that it's safe for athletes. And there are some sports like the MLB and the NHL, they are pretty much bound to that certification. So the supplements that we give those athletes are regulated to that specific certification. Third-party tested is a big one, just to make sure that everything that they are putting in the bottle has been third-party tested. That's a big red flag if they're not third-party tested. And then again, whole food supplements, and then obviously the amounts that they're putting in. So just making sure that if they're using specific minerals or vitamins or amino acids, whatever that may be, that they're reaching kind of our non-negotiables of amounts that should be in that supplement.
Yeah, those are all great ones. I might add the good manufacturing practices, GMP, is a nice label to see on there as well. That's another sort of like a third-party test where they actually look at like how the product is manufactured and like the process, the chemical process by which that they're developing the product, and then get their stamp on it as well. What's interesting is all of these things actually cost money. So getting GMP on your product, or getting NSF, for example, Safe for Sport, those are all expensive. So you're actually going to end up paying more for those products typically, because they're having to pay some amount of money for every tablet that they're producing to put that on their label. So at the same time, it's nice to know that what you're putting in your body is real. The other thing I'll say is we tend to lean on similar companies. Like, so we do, evaluation of particular companies and, make sure that we feel comfortable with their manufacturing processes and all that stuff. And then once you've done that with one company, I tend to put the same sort of confidence in all of their products, as opposed to, having to search between all these different new products. Sometimes there's companies that only make one or two things, and then you can be a little bit less confident about what they're making, unless there's appropriate labels on the bottle, or you do your own independent research.
Yeah, well, I will say too, like, just even calling the company of itself and knowing what questions to ask and asking the right questions is something that we do consistently. Just to make sure that they check all of the boxes that we are looking for from a quality, just regulation standpoint. I've found a lot of information out by just calling them, asking them questions, speaking to the people that are kind of in the upper end of the company, just to understand their values, understand, a lot more in-depth information than just what you read on the bottle. So
what about research? You mentioned that you sometimes call the companies and ask them specific questions about the product, but how do you go about looking at, for example, the literature around a supplement and trying to decipher whether there's a signal there that suggests benefit?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the literature, I rely on a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me, like yourself, Mike, to always pass along the the research that they're reading, and yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you are much more of a very, I mean, almost super intelligent when it comes to sorting through research and finding what's useful and what's not. I really try to read as much literature as I can. I also try to read as many of the professionals that have done the most amount of research in that specific topic. And I will usually read a book on a specific compound. So-and-so has done the most amount of research on glutathione. I am probably going to read their research, so I'm going to look for the person that's, have done the most research, or is the true professional in that specific molecule. And that's where I find the most value of information on specific supplements. But I would love to hear your process as well.
Yeah, I mean, just like any research review, I mean, supplements are challenging because a lot of the times the studies are fairly minimal. We've got a few supplements where we've got large studies, like, for example, vitamin D, omega-3s, creatine. There's the list of things that are really common in the supplement world that have pretty good literature backing them, or at least to review in order to assess quality and validity of some of the claims. But a lot of the stuff that we deal with, there's just not great literature around it. So you're stuck with these smaller studies that, are maybe 20, 30 people, and, they take supplement that's maybe not even available in the same modality that you're thinking about using. Like, maybe they're using IV or IM or something like that, and you're stuck using oral. So there's things like that to consider. But I try to approach it with this lens of, both some degree of signal in the literature suggesting benefit, combined with understanding of a physiological mechanism that makes sense, right? Like, why would it make sense for this person with inflammation to, take glutathione, or to take N-acetylcysteine, for example, or to take quercetin, right? So, like, I want to understand physiologically why this even makes sense, have it backed by the literature, right? And then combine that with an understanding of risk, right? Like, what's the potential downside of taking sulforaphane, right? And when you look at it, it's a compound that's in broccoli, right? And as long as you're not taking these like super giant doses, and then basically it's like eating a bunch of broccoli. So it's like, all right, probably not a lot of risk there. I mean, maybe some stomach upset, right? Maybe you get a little gas, but for all intents and purposes, like, seems like relatively low risk. And granted, we don't have huge studies that evaluate risk for these compounds, for most of them at least. But if you can understand how they work physiologically, what the person's actual physiological basis is to start with, by doing laboratory testing, genetic testing, so you understand where their where they're potentially faltering in that entire, mechanistic process, then it allows you to sort of say like, oh, this seems like a reasonable place to start with this, particular supplement with this person. And then of course we do what you're talking about, where it's combine that with, like test, rinse and repeat, right? So it's like, take the supplement, repeat the test, see where they're at, make sure they've had subjective improvement, make sure there's objective improvement, like all of those things merged together, I think is where we get to this area of adequacy and performance of a particular supplement, and also safety to ensure that we're not, putting somebody on something that's going to end up hurting them in the long run.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say, we get kind of a direction or a probability from the research, but I think there's just so much critical thinking. Like if we at least understand the mechanism of the molecule, we understand the risk, but it takes just a broad spectrum of knowledge to be able to then critically think, is this the right time? Is this the right supplement for this individual and what they're dealing with or what we're trying to solve? And that just does take a broad perspective. It takes a breadth of knowledge. It also takes a depth of knowledge and then critical thinking to problem solve.
Totally. All right. So we talked a lot about supplements. When do you think about alternatives for supplements? So, like we mentioned, we're not always reaching straight for the supplement. Like what would key you into maybe there's an alternate way to getting to this physiologic performance improvement other than taking a pill?
Yeah. So the other big thing we use quite often is different modalities. So like you alluded to earlier, we don't want to put somebody on 75 different supplements because there are so many different molecules and supplements out there. You could, probably get to a pretty high number pretty quickly. So if we can solve that problem with a modality where we apply a specific stimulus to upregulate the endogenous mechanisms to create the healing power or solve that problem, that's always something we will probably reach for if we can. That it makes sense just from, what they have access to, what's in their environment, what they have time for. But we use a lot of different modalities. We use hot, we use cold, we use acupuncture, we use massage, we use a lot of red light therapy. We're using oxygen for different oxygen type treatments. So there's a lot of other different just modalities that we can, upregulate and create the response that we're looking for, where we don't need to reach for a supplement, and we'll actually probably get better response using a modality versus a supplement.
Yeah, there's so many other ways to trigger that hormetic response that we're often looking for from the supplement itself, to basically cause the body to upregulate that particular chemical, right? Or upregulate an alternative chemical that's going to get you to the same outcome, right? Yep. Like for example, ozone in place of glutathione, right? So you've got inflammatory process going on. Ozone is an opportunity to help fight inflammation that you could potentially otherwise be getting for example, taking glutathione or NAC or quercetin or curcumin or any of these other compounds that basically have some of these anti-inflammatory properties. So I think that's a great example of where there's multiple things that we can lean on. And sometimes we end up using both, right? I mean, sometimes with somebody with enough inflammation, you're actually leaning on multiple modalities. In fact, not sometimes, every time we're leaning on multiple modalities to really attack one of these things, right? So it's not just a supplement-based approach. It's cold therapy plus ozone plus red light therapy plus NAC plus like quercetin. Like so, you're hitting these issues that our athletes have from multiple different directions to improve the physiologic response as much as possible.
Yeah, what I was going to say, Mike, is anti-inflammatories have become such a big part of professional sports. It almost seems like most everybody are taking anti-inflammatories at a super high rate. It's staggering to me that people are taking this like candy and are not understanding just the long-term effects that this could have, not only for injury risk, but decreased performance and overall health. And so if we can solve that problem with a supplement or a natural remedy like ozone, and we can do that again with the right timing, right frequency, and the right dosing, and solve that problem for a pharmaceutical that may be a quick fix, but again, it has a lot of cost on the physiology. That I think a lot of these athletes are starting to realize that, hey, they're, looking at the athletes that have aged now and looking how poorly they've aged, and understanding the necessity of having to use these natural modalities to better support their health. So not only their longevity in the sport, but longevity past the sport, that they can kind of maintain this optimal level of health. I think is becoming more popular, and it's starting to a lot of causing a lot of athletes to think twice. But we've had a lot of success by using different modalities and supplementation and sleep and diet, that a lot of our athletes don't have to use inflammatories at all, or if they're using them in very specific acute situations that they use them, and then they're completely off of them after that.
Which is important too. You don't want to be on inflammatories all the time, because then when you really need them, when there's an acute injury, they're not going to give you the benefit, right? Because your body's basically used to them, right? So you've already downregulated that inflammatory process, right? So your body's used to it, and the inflammation's going to just peak that much higher. What about periodization? So when we start athletes on supplements, is that something that they're going to be taking all the time forever? Or do you think about it as, a cycle that goes along with their annual practice and performance schedule?
Yeah, we cycle all of our supplements. There's very rarely there's a supplement that we take constantly year round. I would say minerals may be one that we always pulse in year round, but again, in different ways and different strategies. I would say most athletes are under mineralized. So the more minerals that we can get into the body can kind of create this optimal cellular terrain. Also for hydration, also for just keeping the body in a really good alkaline state, which I think is an underrated form of recovery. That's probably one that we keep in year round. But besides that, everything else is periodized. It's pulsed in, because the nice thing about athletes is they have, very specific periods of time within their calendar year, and they have very specific goals within those periods of time and those blocks of time. And so saying, like, we're going to approach, the next 3 months, their, off-season block, for instance, these are kind of our top 3 goals. Then we're using this routine or this stack of supplements to support those goals. And then we're going to cycle off of those supplements for a period of time, and then evaluate the next block of their off season. That's going to change the goals a little bit, change the parameters of needs that they need to develop in that specific periodized block. So it's always changing, and we don't want to adapt to a specific supplement. We want to have the heightened response of that supplement in season when they're playing, when it matters most. And so we want to make sure that their body just hasn't adapted to it. So when we do use it in season, that their body's getting the most out of that specific adaptation. And so that's kind of the overarching goal with our supplements, is to make sure that we're pulsing things in at the right time. We're supporting their goals, obviously making sure physiology is at a homeostasis, but really in season is where it matters most. So our most potent strategies when it comes to supplementation, we're going to use in season. We're going to make sure that we're doing those tests in the off season to make sure everything is responding favorably. But then all of that, hopefully, response that we get should be when it matters most.
Yeah, I like that. There's probably something there for the non-athlete to learn from that, in terms of periodization of performance and supplementation, and something that I've sort of tried to direct more of my patients towards, even if they're not a professional athlete. I think there's clear advantages to having it on and off season, and as opposed to what I think a lot of us get stuck on, which is this just constant go. It's like it's performance all the time, right? And there's no mesocycling, right? Like there's no downtime, there's no recovery time, there's no off time from the supplements. It's just everything's all the time, and I think that creates wear and tear on the body and on the system in general, nervous system, musculoskeletal system, chronic inflammation, all of these things. So there's something I think to be learned from that piece, even for the non-athlete, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I look as everybody as an athlete, right? Everyone has, specific demands, whether it be technically, tactically, psychologically, and physically. As a mom, as a professional, whatever it may be, I look at everybody as an athlete. And we look at, their microcycles, which is weekly. We look at mesocycles, which is monthly. And then we look at their yearly cycles. And we all are based off of specific daily cycles, monthly cycles, yearly cycles. So what we need in summertime is different when we're going to need in wintertime. And everybody should have a time where it's more intensive and a time where it's more relaxed in their lifestyle, because if they're in season intensive all the time, they're going to wear out. And so, I mean, I push people to structure their yearly cycle like an athlete. And same thing with their weekly cycle too. If you can really kind of hone in and develop those two, the monthly cycles kind of fall into place, but really kind of having a goal with each phase, just having a really intent and focused, process within their yearly cycles, I think was important for everybody.
Good stuff, man. Good stuff. All right, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. I want to know 3 supplements that every athlete should at least consider taking.
This is a tough
pick
one.
3. You only get 3. Yeah, no, you only get 3, bro.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, so I would say, a really good quality trace mineral supplement. 2 that we used is quite regularly with our athletes is a product called Ketone Hypertonic, which is it's sourced from plankton blooms in the ocean. So it's got like 80 different minerals and trace minerals. And then another one we use is called Shilajit, which is sourced from the mountains. And so again, it's a very complex, rich mineral source that's really popular in Ayurvedic medicine. So I would say just a really good, kind of generalized mineral supplement. I would definitely say omega-3, high DHA, EPA. However, I don't think a mega supplement is ever going to replace eating whole food seafood. I think when you have a food that's kind of wrapped in its evolutionary matrix that has all of the minerals and vitamins and everything that go with that omega fatty acid, I don't think it's easy to replace that, but I do think it's important for everybody to be on an omega supplement. And then my third is probably creatine. I would probably put on everybody. I mean, again, the multiple benefits that you get from creatine, I would put everybody on it, from, our high performing athletes to a 70-year-old female. So those are probably the 3, if I was to say, are most important. If I could narrow it down, those are the 3 I pick, I think.
That's a tough question. I'm not sure I would have any different answers for you, to be honest. It's tough. Maybe I'm just so tempted to say vitamin D as well. I don't know. I don't know which one you take out, right? Can we have 4? And then what about aminos? What about like, BCAAs or?
Yeah, I would definitely put essential amino as part of that as well. All
right, so we're up to 5.
Yeah, again, most of our athletes are on essential amino acids. So,
all right, cool stuff. All right, well, Nate Berry, man, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, talking with us about this. This has been, I think, just a really cool conversation around supplements in general, not just in athletic performance. We probably try to narrow it down to athletes too much, because in reality, I think there's a lot here for people who don't even necessarily see themselves as athletes like you. So amazingly described as everyone is an athlete. But thanks so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was a lot of fun, Mike. I really appreciate it.
That's all for this episode. Thanks everyone for listening. And if you're looking for more, be sure to follow us on social at WildHealthMD and head over to wildhealth.com or wildhealth.com/premium to become a patient and experience precision medicine for yourself.